For those of you who are old timers, this is going to be old hat, but maybe you'll learn something new, I hope. But really, this is geared towards new hams and folks who are maybe had their license for a while, but just have not really gotten on the air, or they want to get into emergency communications. And so we're just going to talk about the fundamentals of talking on, say, on a handy talkie or your mobile radio when you're on VHF or UHF. So we'll start off with, so you got your license, your radio antenna. Now what happens? Well, we're going to talk primarily about how to operate in things like networks, a radio net. Net ops are vital if you're in disaster communications. If you're an emergency communicator, you have to know how to work on a net. And that has a number of different things we're going to talk about related to nets and how we operate on nets. But knowing how to function on a net is extremely important. And it helps the net run smoothly. And sometimes you may get stuck being the net control operator. And if you don't know how to do that, you might be in a world of hurts. So it's always good to practice that. And that's one of the things we do with our nets here in our ARES group, Eastern County ARES. We rotate around our net control operators. So everybody gets a chance to get on the air and be a net control op. And I think that's really a good way to do it. We're going to cover all the basics here tonight. We're not going to get into really detailed stuff, but we're going to talk about what's a net, because some folks may not know what that is. We're going to talk about the different types of nets that there are. One thing that always comes up that people are confused about is tactical call signs. So we're going to talk a lot about tactical call signs and how you use those. We're going to talk about simplex operation versus using a repeater. Very important. And when you use a repeater, we're going to talk about some things like PL or CTCSS tones, the PL, the tone squelch on the radio. We're going to talk about that, how that works. And we're going to get into just a little bit more complicated stuff about linked repeaters. That creates a whole new set of problems. And I shouldn't say, well, potential problems, but a whole new set of things you need to be aware of if you're using linked repeaters. And then we're going to get into some advanced ideas. We'll talk about, like I just said, you're stuck as net control. Now what do I do? Yeah, that's a big one. And the other thing I want to talk about is interference. Interference of many different sorts. Primarily, I want to talk about jammers, and that's a jammer is an intentional interference. But many times we have unintentional interference, a stuck mic, right? Stuck microphone will be considered unintentional interference. So we'll talk about all those things tonight. So what's a net? What is a net? Well, by definition, a radio net is 3 or more stations communicating on a common frequency. Okay, so that makes sense. There's 3 of us, we're talking on a particular frequency. It may be on VHF, UHF, or gosh, it could be on HF, most likely for me on HF. But there's different types of nets. So what kinds of nets are there? Well, we're going to talk about, first off, what I consider informal nets. And then we'll talk about something called a directed net. So an informal net is kind of what we do, when we're certainly not doing MCOM, but just kind of, it's the casual roundtable discussion where we're on a single frequency, all talking to each other, and we go around the group, and there may be 3 or more people talking. I mentioned earlier that we have our vintage single sideband group. We get on a couple of times a week, and we'll have up to 20 people in a roundtable. And we do have a net control operator in that case, but typically an informal net does not have a net control operator. There's no formal procedures. There's no protocol. There's no one supervising their net. We're just yakking amongst ourselves in a casual manner and just sending it from one station to the next. And we have people break in and what have you. That's an informal net. Okay. Now, when we talk about a directed net, this is a little different. This is a formal net. This net has established procedures and protocols. In other words, there is a written protocol for this net that defines what the purpose is and all this. And in addition to being procedures and protocols, someone's in charge. We have a net control station or a net control operator, and he's in command of the net. So a little about the net control station. He's the operator in charge, and I like to refer to him as the net's traffic cop. He's the guy that's directing traffic, directing the stations on the net, telling them what to do, asking them information, what have you. His role is to open and close the net. He might open it, hand it to somebody else, and somebody else will close the net. But the net control station is the one that opens the net, and the net control station is the one that closes the net. And it may be a different operator at that point. If it's an extended net in a disaster, it might go on for hours, days, so you're not going to have one guy sitting there the whole time. But that's the role of net control. He's going to take check-ins from the participants. He's going to maintain a log of the participants and all information pertaining to each station that's checking in on the net. He's going to oversee passing network traffic, and we're going to talk about traffic in a minute, because that's another thing that's a new word to people, that they don't understand what that means. Especially non-hams don't understand when we talk about, well, yeah, we're handling traffic. Well, what does that mean? I don't see any cars. When you think of traffic, you think of cars on the freeway, especially in LA. But network traffic, that's one bit. And the network control station, the net control operator, he's maintaining the net discipline. That's his role. He is making sure that people aren't jumping in on top of each other. He's making sure that everybody takes their turn and that the traffic is directed correctly and all of that. So he's the guy in charge. He's the guy you got to listen to. So more on directed nets, talk a little bit more about that. The procedures and protocols. A lot of times, I mentioned the NCS opens the net. One of the first things he'll do is he'll state the net's purpose. You open the net, and it might be just a practice, an exercise, a drill. We have a weekly net that we call the Indian Wells Valley Emergency Net. It's our ARRL net. And the purpose of that net is for us to test our equipment and to get disperse any pertinent information to the amateurs here in Indian Wells Valley. That's the purpose of the net. But it might be for a drill. So you state that at the beginning of the net, that this is a drill. The other thing that net control operator is going to do is he's always going to look for emergency or priority traffic. Somebody may have an emergency, and that does happen. Even on your weekly nets that you have with your Aries group or your radio club or whatever, you still might have somebody pop in with emergency traffic, priority traffic. So it's important to get that right up front, make sure that's handled. And after that, he's going to begin the process of checking in stations. So he's going to start asking for check-ins. Now, the way he might ask for check-ins is that, or he or she, I apologize, it could be he or she who is the net control operator. And we have both, including my wife. She's one of our net control operators here in Indian Wells Valley. Eastern Kern County, you might go through a roster. Now, the problem with that, the problem with the roster is, okay, you identified everybody, but if you got 100 people on your roster and only 20 of them check in, you waste a lot of time. And the other problem with a roster is everybody knows where they are in the list, so they don't have to stick around the whole time. They go, well, he doesn't get to me until about 5 minutes into the start of the net, so I'm just going to go do something else for a while, and I'll come back and check in. And that's not the way to do it. That's not right. So I don't like doing rosters. I think that's a bad way to do nets. A better way to do it is to use another means, like the first letter of the call sign suffix. And so you can break the group. If you've got 100 operators, you can break it down into smaller groups. Suffixes beginning with A through D will limit the number of people who are checking in. And what happens on a repeater is you get people keying up at the same time, and you get doubling and all kinds of chaos. So having that number whittled down to just a couple at a time is a good way to do it. The group I used to belong to in Orange County, we encouraged our net control operators, which everyone in the group was a net control operator at one time or another during the year, to do something other than the first letter of the call sign. So the guys would do things like, how about your shoe size? Check in according to your shoe size. Check in according to how long you've been licensed. Things like that. It just breaks the group up. And being clever, makes it more interesting. And it certainly did for our group. Well, okay, continuing on, net control operators conducting normal net business. He may be making announcements or asking for announcements. He may have news. And of course, the big thing, he's going to be passing traffic through the net. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And we've done other presentations on RATPAC about traffic message handling. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about that. I'm going to bring up some salient points that you need to think about. But in terms of the overall details of handling message traffic, I'm not going to go into the details of that. We've had others doing that before. So we've talked about the net and the net control operator. What about the participants? What about you? Well, I always start out, I've got 3 rules that I tell people that I have for participating in a net. And this is important. And it's not just a net, it's anytime you're on the air. I believe in these 3 rules. The first rule is that you listen. Listen before you transmit. Okay. Second rule is to listen some more before you transmit. Third rule, listen even more. I can't stress that enough. In doing this, if you make this your practice and you're joining a new group, you understand what the protocol and procedures are in the net by listening to what's going on. How is the net control taking check-ins? What kind of things are this net doing? What are they doing? The way you learn that is by listening. And I think it's really important. And a lot of hams, I think, fail to do this. And we run into it all the time. So this is my most important guidance of anything that I ever tell anybody that's on the air is always listen. So keeping that in mind, what are we going to be listening to? Well, we're going to be listening to the net control station's instructions. You okay? Oh, she's taking her sling off to get her jacket off. She's making funny faces. She broke her arm last week, so her arm's in a sling. Oh, well. Okay. So listen to what the net control is saying. Listen to his instructions, and most importantly, follow those instructions. Typically, you won't transmit unless you're invited to do so. And typically, the net control will start taking check-ins, and that's an invitation to transmit. However he's doing it, if he's going through a roster and calling your call sign, that's your invitation to transmit. If he's asking you to go via your suffix, then that's an invitation to transmit. If you haven't been invited to transmit, don't transmit unless you have emergency or priority traffic. That is the exception. You are always allowed to break in if you have emergency traffic. That's a given. And there's lots of ways to do that. But check-ins, we don't want to transmit unless we're being asked to check in. NCS may be asking for traffic. He might be asking for traffic. A stations have traffic at that time. You just give your call sign, nothing else. You just say, this is W60Q, I have traffic. Don't say anything more until he recognizes you. Once you're recognized, now it's your turn to transmit. And you can say, oh, well, I have a message for thus and so. And so if thus and so is a member of the net, he'll call that person and make sure they're there. And then he'll allow you to pass your traffic to that person if that person is there and ready to copy the traffic. An important point of that. The other thing that we always ask people to do is to please use ITU phonetics. You guys know the phonetic alphabet. It's really cute to have special phonetics for your call sign and all this. All it does is confuse things. If you're on an emergency net, a disaster net, ITU phonetics are very important. And I don't want to tell you how many times on our nets we have to have people repeat their call sign because they don't do it phonetically. Make it a habit. It should be automatic. When you check into a net, use phonetics for your call sign. Just make it a habit every time. I do. That's what I do. It's always Whiskey 6 Delta Quebec. And I may follow that up with W60Q, but I always am Whiskey 6 Delta Quebec when I check into a net. And I think that's important. It makes it easier on the net control operator, whoever's listening for you. It makes it easier on them. They're not trying to struggle to get your call sign out of a noisy situation. So ITU phonetics, a must. Continuing with your responsibilities, once you're checked in, of course, the net control operator expects you to be there. So if you're a part of a net, don't get up and walk away. But if you have to get up and walk away, let the net control station know. Give him a call when there's a break in traffic, when there's no activity, give him a call. Net control, this is W6DQ. And when he recognizes me, I need to run an errand. I'll be back in 10 minutes. And I'm excused for the net for 10 minutes. So if I have to leave, I let him know. And sometimes you may not have any choice. Maybe your batteries failed. You're changing batteries, or maybe your radio broke. Good idea to have a backup radio if you're on a deployment. Have a second radio in case a radio breaks or batteries fail. Make sure you have plenty of battery backup. Always an important thing. We talked about that when we talked about go bags. But sometimes you don't have a choice. Something happens. So, there are exceptions. But what you may run into is if you don't tell the net control operator that you're leaving, he may call you periodically. They may do a net roll call periodically. And that's something when you're on an emergency net or a disaster net or doing a drill, we periodically do roll calls just to check the status of each operator that's part of the drill. So we'll go down through a list of ops that have checked in, and then we'll ask for new check-ins. So we'll sometime during the net, if you're not there and somebody has some traffic for you, what's the problem there? You've got a problem. So there may be maybe traffic for you or a request for information from you. And if you're not there, you can't provide it. So you need to respond when you're called. Important. Again, give your call sign, and we're going to talk about tactical calls. I mentioned this earlier. Use your tactical call sign if you're on some kind of a deployment, if you have a tactical name, and then wait for further instructions. Right? So when you're called, give your call sign. Wait for further instructions. After that, net control will come back to you. And I'm going to talk about technical calls. I mentioned that before. And I'm going to talk about traffic. But more responsibilities on this notion of leaving the net. If you have to leave the net, contact the net control station. That's important. Let the net control station know that you need to leave. You don't have to tell them why you're leaving. You don't have to tell them why. Just, I need to leave the net. I won't be coming back. Or I need to leave the net for 10 minutes because I have to go do some particular task, whatever it is, but just let the net control. And likewise, let them know you left, let them know if you come back, if and when you come back. If you don't come back, well, you've told them that you're not coming back. But if you do come back, let the net control station know that you are back. Call them. That's important. Now, I always have to have a little bit of levity in here. This could be obvious to most people, but to some people, it's not obvious. Push to talk means release to listen. And guess what? Some people don't get that. We've run into that before. Release to listen. I like that. The other thing we've run into is, I get a thumbs up. Thank you. I appreciate that. Use the right side of the microphone. Talk in the correct side of the microphone. Don't talk into the back of the microphone. People do that. You pick up the microphone quickly and you got the microphone turned around the wrong way and you're talking and all they hear is mumbling and noise at the other end. That happens. That does happen. You'd be surprised. But then again, maybe you wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. But I want to share some good practice. These are what I consider to be good practices while you're checking in. First off, if you've got a lot of people trying to check in, there's always a chance of interference with each other. In other words, you double. And on an FM repeater, that's bad news because you won't be able to make out either station or any of the stations if they're all interfering with each other. If you have operated on a repeater and you know what happens when you got two people on at the same time, it's just intermodulation and noise and corruption. So one of the things that I like is when you first go to check in, when you click your mic switch, this is, and you release it, and you pause, and you listen. Remember Dennis's 3 rules. I release the mic switch and I listen. If I don't hear anything, then I give my call sign, Whiskey 6 Delta Quebec. This is release, listen, and if somebody else is calling, I just stand by, wait for them to finish. This is W6DQ, Whiskey 6 Delta Quebec. And so that's kind of a good practice, and it reduces the chaos on a net. And if you've got a lot of operators, I like to say that it reduces doubling, what we call doubling, or multiple transmissions at the same time. And if there's multiple transmissions going on at the same time on an FM repeater, the net control won't understand generally. Well, a lot of times the strongest signal will capture what we refer to as capturing the receiver on the repeater, but generally that doesn't happen. It's usually just interference. So this works really well for that. If you don't do that, try it, see what happens. And that works equally well on 2 meters, 432 or 440, or even on HF. So that's some little bit about the responsibilities of an operator as a participant in a net. I want to talk about tactical calls because there's a lot of confusion about this, and some people have it right, some people don't have it right. But what is a tactical call? A tactical call is used to identify a position or a location. So it's not your call sign. It might be, if you're on a deployment, it might be your location, right? Like a shelter or something. So I'm on deployment, I'm an incident command. And so that's my tactical call sign, incident command. So everybody knows, if you hear my call sign, you don't know where I am. I could be anywhere. But if you hear me saying incident command, you know immediately that's where I'm located. And if somebody relieves me, now they're going to use that same tactical call, and they don't have to know who the new person is relieving me. They could be anybody, another ham, of course, but somebody's relieved me, different call sign, but the guys on the net don't have to know that call sign. All they have to know is that it's incident command. So that's the purpose of a tactical call. So it could be, we talk about maybe a hospital by the name of Lakewood Hospital. We just shorten that up to Lakewood. Or if you're working in a hospital, it could be a department in the hospital, pharmacy, emergency department, surgery, neonatal, any of those things. Those are all tactical calls. Now, the idea is that they have to be descriptive, but you want them to be simple, easy to understand, and unique. Of course, I didn't mention that here in my description, but it has to be unique. You don't want two stations with the same tactical call. That won't work. However, if you happen to be in multiple hospitals, like the group that I used to belong to, we'd have a net internal to the hospital. And of course, there might be multiple, there's going to be multiple hospitals, so there'll be multiple internal nets. And so you'll have multiple incident commands at the hospitals, but each is on a different frequency, typically on UHF. And then they have an external net that's on VHF on 2 meters. So again, I mentioned this, but why do we use tactical calls? Why are they so important? And this is the key thing. Operators may change, but the assignment may not. So the assignment stays the same. The incident command isn't going to go away, but another operator might come in and take over incident command. So we don't have to know who that operator is. We just have to know that they're at incident command. You don't need to know the operator's licensed call sign. So that's why we use tactical call signs. That's what they are. Now, the big question that people always have is, how do you identify when you're using a tactical call sign? And it's really simple. It's very, very simple, and it's very clear if you go read Part 97. And it's actually in Part 97, paragraph 119, sets the rules for identification. It says, during a communications, you must ID every 10 minutes during a communications, or at the end of a communication. Now, what is a communication? A communication can be multiple exchanges between two stations. So I can be transmitting 3 or 4 different times to another station, and we're talking back and forth, listening and talking, listening and talking, listening and talking. That is a communication. The single piece that I'm sending is a transmission. So I'm transmitting, he's transmitting, I'm transmitting, he's transmitting. That's communication. When that communication ends, when we're done, we have to ID, or if it lasts 10 minutes or more, we have to ID. That is the requirement from Part 97, paragraph 119. Okay. Another interesting part of this is that you don't have to send the other guy's call sign. There is nothing in Part 97 that says you have to identify the other station. How about that? People always complain about that. There's nothing in there that says that I have ever found. And I've read through this thing multiple times over the years. You don't have to. But of course, this makes using technical call signs much easier, and it makes it very, very flexible. So tactical call, we use that at the end of a communication. We can use it during a communication, the tactical call sign. We might be having multiple participants in a communication. It might not be just 2 stations, but it could be more. We might be passing some traffic or some information. So we can use that tactical communication or that tactical ID to recognize where we are. But we can use that during the communications. Rather than using my call sign, I'm going to use that I'm going to use that tactical call. And when I'm done, I'm going to ID when I'm finished, or if I'm running more than 10 minutes. Typically, if you're on a net, like in an event, whether it's an exercise, a drill, or a real bona fide disaster, or just a weekly net, you're very rarely going to be talking more than 10 minutes. Now, on our vintage nets, we try to hold it down, but once in a while we get a couple of guys that like to talk at great length. I'm not going to name any names, but I do like to talk, but I try to hold it down. But I rarely, if ever, hit 10 minutes. But I always ID at the end of the communication, so that's important. But also on those nets, those are casual, informal nets, so we don't use tactical call signs either. But you got to be mindful of that. Be mindful of the 10-minute limit. But like I say, generally communications will be less than 10 minutes. So when the communications are completed, you can ID. So when you hear folks like a net control operator give their call sign after every transmission they make, that's not necessary. It's wasting bandwidth. It's wasting bandwidth. You don't have to ID after every single transmission. This is net control. Over to whoever, net control, standing by. And I didn't ID. I won't ID until I'm done with my communications. So at the end, both stations or multiple stations involved all have to ID. That's important. Like I mentioned, Part 97-119 says at the end of a communications, you have to ID, and that applies to everybody involved in that communication, not everybody on the net, but if anybody on the net is involved in that communication, they're going to have to ID. And it's important. The net control operator needs to allow time for the other stations to ID. I know so many net control operators don't allow that time. A nice pause when you're done, just to make sure that the other guys ID. I was reading something here recently where some nets, when they're going along, and every 10 minutes they have everybody key their mic and ID at the same time. Well, it fulfills the legal obligation by Part 97, but if you're on a repeater, it might be chaos. But anyway, but every 10 minutes, there you go. But if you're not transmitting, if I'm not communicating, if I've ID'd by my last communication, I don't have to ID again ever on that particular net. So that covers those basics. Now let's talk a little bit about traffic. First of all, traffic is not 5 o'clock on the 405 freeway here in LA. Well, down south in LA. We know what it's like on the freeways in Los Angeles. That is traffic, but traffic is really a common term that applies to any message, and it could be, any kind of message. It's either formal. We'll talk a little bit about this: formal or informal messages, formal or informal traffic. Informal traffic is something that is tactical in nature, meaning that it has a very short lifespan. And you may not necessarily expect an answer. And it's maybe something in general to the group, or it might be something specific to net control that you want to tell them. And an example I'll give of that is that I might be joining a net and I'm being deployed, and I might tell the net control operator that I'm arriving at an assignment in 15 minutes. I'm arriving at my assignment. Or I'm arriving at my assignment. I'm in the parking lot and I'm ready to go in. That's kind of a tactical, informal message. Now, a formal message is quite different from that. And like I said, we have done presentations, and I'll give an example here. You can go and check out on RATPAC. But I think in looking at this and looking over, I don't want to delve into formal traffic handling on here, because that's not the purpose of this presentation tonight. We'll do others on that. Well, we have done them in the past. But formal traffic, typical formal traffic, if you're in a deployment, might be a request for supplies or personnel. And that's going to have both a going to and coming from, like it might be from incident command, going to someplace, like let's say you're in a hospital and it's going to a medical supply looking for supplies. That would be considered formal traffic. So we're looking for supplies or we're looking for personnel. So we have it's time critical, maybe. They need an answer. They need to know quickly if the stuff's available or whatever it is they're after. These are examples of what we'll call formal traffic. So there's a to and a from, and most importantly, there's things like precedence, which is the priority or, that sort of thing of the message. Is it really, really urgent, important, life critical that we get this right away? So things like ICS 213s, you're familiar with that. ICS 213 is a good example of something that might be handled as formal traffic. Now, we have covered this in detail on other RATPAC videos, and the one I give as an example is one that Kate Hutton did a couple of years ago. She is the I think she's Region 6 traffic manager here for our Region 6 down here in California for the traffic nets here. And Kate has been here on RATPAC and done a really great presentation on traffic, formal messages. And I think she calls it functional radio messages, I think is what she called the talk. But take a look at that. And of course, I urge you, if you really want to learn about this, there's lots and lots and lots of information online that you can study. Just look for formal message handling and search for that and you'll find it. But again, that's a subject I really don't want to get into tonight because it's just too much detail. And we really don't have the time to do something like that in a single sitting like this with doing everything else we're doing tonight. But in terms of traffic handling, I want you to remember some important things. And the key thing to remember is if you are passing some traffic, don't dump your traffic. Make sure that you've contacted the net control station, and the net control station now knows that you have traffic and who that traffic is for. Because if the other person or station that the traffic is for isn't on the net, you're wasting bandwidth. You're just going to sit there and dump your message, and the guy you're sending it to, or the gal or guy, is not going to be there. It's a waste of time. You don't want to do that. Never dump traffic. You always want to make sure you go through the net control and make sure that the net control recognizes that you have traffic and that it recognizes who the traffic is for, if it's another station, and make sure that that other station is there. So typically what'll happen is you'll call net control. So net control is Lakewood Shelter with traffic, and you'll stand by. And net control may be talking to a bunch of other people, but eventually he may recognize you. Hopefully he'll recognize you, and he may come back to you and ask you for the nature of the traffic and the destination. Well, I have some emergency traffic for thus and so. And you stand by. Don't dump the traffic. You're not there yet, but just let the net control know what you have and who it's for. Once you've done that, net control would contact the destination. If it's on our net, it may be on another net. You may send you to we have multiple nets running simultaneously. The net control may send you to a different net to pass your traffic. For instance, when I was in Orange County, we had our hospital nets, we had a Races nets, and we had a Red Cross net. Maybe I was in a hospital and they had a request for blood. I'm not going to do that on our net. Net control is going to send me over to the Red Cross net, and I'm going to do a request for blood on the Red Cross net. And I'm going to follow these same rules. I'm going to call the net control operator and let them recognize me and say, I have traffic for the blood bank. So very important that you keep this in mind, that you just don't want to just dump your traffic out and dump the message to net control. On a busy net, this can be a problem. They may have you move to a distant frequency in general, but they'll contact the destination, then have you proceed. And you'll ask the net control will ask the other station, are you ready to copy the message? That's important. Or they'll send you to another net and you'll go through the same routine on another net. Just be aware of that. In general, if you're on a busy net, a lot of groups have multiple repeaters or multiple frequencies they can operate on. The net control can move you to another frequency just to move your traffic, and then have you come back to the net when you're done. So that's another thing. You're going to say that you've QSY'd to another frequency, and when you're back, you're going to let net control know that you're back, right? Again, follow the net control's instructions. Listen to what the net control is telling you to do. Another important point about traffic is, and we see this happen occasionally, is that the message needs to be complete before you call the net control. In other words, you need to have everything in order for your message before you call net control to pass the traffic. If you're still working on the message and you call net control, you're wasting everybody's time. Make sure you have all the information you need. If you're sending a message on behalf of another person that you're in your served agency, your AHJ, make sure you have all the information from that purpose, because you're sending this message on their behalf, and you have to know who it's going to, who it's coming from, what the message is, and maybe the priority, things like that. It's very important to be accurate. Very important to have accurate information. And the other thing that I think is important, there's a lot of things you're dealing with when you're doing traffic. There's a lot of little minutia that you're going to be working on, but these are the things to me that are important: is the precedence. Is it an emergency? Is it just a routine message? Do I expect a reply? Do I need a response? Do I need to know, gee, I need some medical supplies. When can I have them? I need a reply back from whoever the message is going to, telling me that I can have those supplies to you in 30 minutes. Now, you're not going to get the answer immediately, but whoever you're sending it to is going to go off and do their job and then come back to the net and say, hey, I can get that to you in 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever. Or we don't have any, we're going to substitute something else, whatever happens, whatever the message is. But that's an important piece, is you've got to be accurate. You've got to have the message complete before you try to send it. And, if you need a response, net control needs to make note of that as well and keep track of it. So that's just some of the basics of handling traffic. And like I say, we're not going to cover all the details of it here tonight. That's another session. We could certainly do more sessions on that. It'd probably be a good idea to do that with our series that we're doing now on emergency communications. We probably should do something on traffic handling, but not going to do that tonight. Okay, so another thing I want to cover is simplex versus using repeaters. So you hear the term. If you're a new ham, you might not understand what a repeater is. You might not understand when somebody says, well, I'm going to talk to you on simplex. Use a simplex frequency. What does that mean? When I say I'm on simplex, that means that I'm transmitting and receiving on the same frequency. So I've got two radios, and I'm talking directly from radio to radio. Two guys, two gals, a guy and a gal, whatever, talking to each other. Two radios talking directly to each other. That is simplex. One frequency. We're talking directly between two radios, no repeater. Now, if you don't know what a repeater is, we're going to talk about that in a minute. We'll fill you in on that. But the thing is about simplex, you don't require a repeater for simplex, so you don't require any infrastructure of any kind. You can talk to somebody else simplex anytime, as long as you're within range. You are limited by the environment. You've got to be within range of each other, physical distance. There may be obstructions that you have to worry about. You might be inside of a building, and that's something to take note of. I mentioned having an internal net in a hospital and an external net. When we were doing this stuff years ago, you might be in a situation like that where you're in a facility and you have a net inside the facility. We always found, and this is my guidance, the best frequencies to use for internal communications are 440. It's interesting how 440 will penetrate a building when you're inside the building. It'll go through closed doors, even steel doors. It will penetrate through the door jamb. 2 meters won't do that. But 440 works very well if you're inside a building, a multi-story, whatever structure. 440 works really great for internal communications within a building. So you might be running a simplex net inside a hospital, for instance. That's an example. So keep that in mind. Obstructions, there's a mountain in the way. Well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to talk over the mountain, but of course my antenna makes a difference. The amount of radiated power I have. These things all will limit what you could do on simplex. Now, just because you're on simplex doesn't mean you can't overcome these. You might use a relay. So that's a third station that's also on simplex that can relay your message or your traffic or whatever you're doing. So if things are sketchy, ask for a relay and somebody who can hear both of you, hear your station and hear the net control station or the station you're trying to contact. That person is an intermediate relay, acting like a repeater, but they're doing it on simplex frequency. Okay, so something to keep that in mind. That's a good thing to practice too. That's one thing we do. We're in a fairly large valley here on our on our nets here, we do practice a simplex net periodically, and we ask for relays. And if somebody's not making it into the net control station, we'll ask for somebody we ask operators to ask for someone to relay for them. One thing I didn't mention that just dawned on me, and I need to make this clear: when you're a net control operator, you need to acknowledge everyone who checks in. Anybody who contacts you, you have to acknowledge them. A little bit of an aside there, but that's an important point. Make sure the net control station, make sure you're acknowledged if you're calling net control. And if you are net control, make sure you acknowledge anybody calling you. That's an important thing. And that plays into doing a simplex net, that if you're trying to check in and net control isn't acknowledging you on simplex, ask for a relay and get somebody to relay your check-in to the net control station. So that's want to make that clear. So let's talk about repeaters. What is a repeater? Well, first of all, it's infrastructure, but it's not like commercial infrastructure like a telco or some. Well, it might be, but it's not a telco. It might be using the internet to connect multiple repeaters together. Typically, it's a repeater that's sitting on top of a building. It's sitting on top of a mountain somewhere. It's sitting on top of a tall tower. The whole purpose of the repeater is to extend the range of your radio. Okay, so it's going to be located at a high point. And the example, the repeater's up on top of a mountain, and two people on either side of the mountain can talk to each other because there's a repeater on top of the mountain. So that's what a repeater is for. It's a common point that we can all talk through, that's in a high location that everybody has access to. Now, let's talk about repeaters. We're going to go into the basics. So repeaters transmit and receive on different frequencies. Why is that? Because it's transmitting and receiving at the same time. So it's receiving your signal and transmitting on another frequency. So it's repeating what you're saying on your radio. That's why it's called a repeater. It's translating that frequency to another frequency. It's basically you're taking an input, changing to another frequency, and putting it out as an output. Now there's problems with that fundamentally. If you think about it, I get a receiver and a transmitter. Aren't they going to interfere with each other? Well, that's part of designing repeaters correctly so that they don't. So we use various things to keep them from interfering with themselves. We use that separation of frequency, by the way, that's called split or an offset. Those are the terms you'll hear: split or offset. When we're running split on a repeater, that's the two frequencies we're talking about. But we might use filters to separate the transmit and receive. We might use separate antennas that are separated by distance. The transmitter and receiver might be separated by miles and linked together somehow. That's all to eliminate interference. So typically, most repeaters that are co-located on a mountaintop, they may use one antenna for transmit and receive, but use filters to allow both transmit and receive to use the same antenna. And those filters are very good. So that's how we don't have any interference. You don't want to have your transmitter taking over the receiver, what we call desensing the receiver. So that's why we use filters and physical separation, maybe separate antennas, however we do it. Splits are generally standardized to the band. For instance, on 2 meters, the standardization is 600 kilohertz. And depending on where you are on the band, it might be a positive offset or a negative offset. So you'll hear that term. So you're either going to add 600 kilohertz or you're going to subtract 600 kilohertz. And of course, if you happen to be on a frequency that's in an odd place, we talk about odd splits. And odd splits are those which are not 600 kilohertz. It might be some other value. That's an odd split. So you have to be aware of those. Know what that is for the repeater that you're going to use so that you can program your radio to operate it. So I mentioned that programming the radio. Your radio has to be configured to use the repeater. And I think the guys covered that, getting your radio set up in the last couple of presentations we did on Encom. Talk about how to set up the radio, how you're going to set the frequency, the transmit, possibly the transmit and receive, or you're going to set the receive frequency and the offset for transmits, typically what you're setting. That's one part of it. You're going to transmit on the repeater's receive frequency. And you're going to listen on the repeater's transmit frequency. That makes sense. That makes sense. We're going to transmit on a repeater's receiver, and then it's going to transmit your signal, and we're going to listen to where it's transmitting. So that's the split. We generally identify repeaters by their transmit frequency. Like for instance, our repeater, we got two repeaters here in Indian Wells Valley. One we refer to as the 147 repeater. That's the frequency on which it transmits. That's the frequency we're going to listen to, 147.000. 147.000. That's the 147 repeater. And then we talk about the one four, what is 14634, 14634, 14534. I can't remember. But we talk about the 34 repeater. Again, that's the transmit frequency is 340. I think it's 145. No, it's got to be 146340. No. Oh, I'm confused. Never mind. You don't need to know that anyway. That's our repeater. I don't know if there's anybody here from Eastern Kern County areas or Sierra Amateur Radio Club. Just ignore me. But they're generally, like I say, they're identified by their transmit frequency, so that if you know the repeater, the repeater's transmit frequency, you can generally figure out what frequency you're going to be transmitting on, depending on where it is in the band, to make sure that the transmit frequency is still in band, and especially in the segment that's assigned to repeaters. So that's what that's all about. So more on the basics. We're going to talk about what we call PL or CTCSS tones. This is a subaudible tone that's transmitted while you key the mic. The radio is transmitting a subaudible tone. So the idea is you don't hear it. The receiver filters it out so that your receiver filters it out so you don't hear it. The repeater may not even pass that tone. Typically they don't. But the tone is used to open the squelch on the repeater. So it basically keys up the repeater. And the function is referred to as a carrier operated relay, or a core. You'll hear that term, COR. And that's what the tone is used to key. The tone brings up the core. And if you don't have the right tone, you won't key up the repeater. So it's important to know what the tone is. Now, the terms PL and CTCSS, let me explain those a little bit here. PL was coined by Motorola years and years and years ago, and it refers to what Motorola calls private line. And that was exactly the idea. You could have multiple machines, multiple repeaters on the same frequency, multiple radios on the same frequency with different PL tones, and you'll only hear the radio that has the PL tone that you want to listen to. You have even on Simplex, you can set a filter or set a tone encode on your receive side so that you just receive one particular tone. And if that tone isn't there, you're not going to break squelch on your radio. So if you're doing Simplex with a lot of people on different groups sharing a frequency, that's a good way to deal with it, is with PL tones. So PL, private line for Motorola. CTCSS is the term we use now, continuous tone coded squelch system, continuous tone coded squelch. So it's a tone that's on when you're continuously transmitting. When you stop transmitting, the tone goes away and the core drops out and the repeater goes back to listen again, right? So let's see. Again, the idea of PL tones is to provide frequency co-location, not repeater co-location, but frequency. So I can have multiple repeaters on the same pair of frequencies within range of each other, but I can minimize the interference by using PL tones. That's the idea. So if that other repeater comes up, it won't key my repeater that's local to me, but we're on the same frequency. So that's why we use the PL tones. It also limits access. Some repeaters, we have a repeater here in Southern California that's a wide area repeater that sits out on Catalina Island off the coast, and it has no PL tone. It's wide open, so you don't have to have a PL. So, and then that's by design, it's done that way because it's a general use, open to everybody repeater. It's a really nice system. But we use different tones on the same frequency. This is what I'm referring to. By using different tones on the same repeater frequency or the same radio frequency, I can have multiple. They can't necessarily go on simultaneously, but you won't be listening to the other conversations. That's the idea. You don't have to listen to all the other traffic on a simplex frequency if you use the PL tones. So it doesn't eliminate that interference. In other words, it doesn't eliminate another station transmitting. If you transmit while the other station is transmitting, it's going to cause interference, but be aware of that. But you don't have to listen to it, which is the good part of it. It reduces the traffic repeater users have to listen to. Okay. So more on basics on repeaters. I want to continue with that. Some other considerations that you want to think about, and this is an important one also, is timing. Most repeaters take a certain amount of time from the time that you hit the PTT, the push to talk button, until that repeater comes up and is transmitting. It's a delay. And I'll talk about that as the repeater takes time to come up. And if you start talking as soon as you hit the mic switch, you're going to get cut off because the repeater isn't transmitting yet. It might take a half a second or more for the repeater to come up and be active. So that requires you, what it requires of you as the guy transmitting is to wait a few moments. If you talk too fast, you're going to cut off the first words or syllables. But what you want to do is delay after pressing the PTT. And a good practice is to take a breath. This is W6DQ. I paused. I took a breath. I paused. Or I'll think to myself, 1000, 1000. Start talking. Take that break. Don't immediately talk when you key the repeater up. We have some folks here in the Valley who do that, and we always get the first part of their call signs cut off because of that when they're trying to check in. But fortunately, we know who they are. You know who the rest of the call signs, so you know who's checking in. But it can be disconcerting if you'll miss part of a message. You might miss something important. You don't know. But it's important for you as the participant to make that delay. Just wait a second. Just take a breath and wait. Then talk. Okay? Important. The other thing you want to be aware of is don't talk too long. Most repeaters have what's called a timeout timer. And this could be anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes. Depends on the repeater. And it varies from repeater to repeater. There's no set amount. But what it does is if you talk too long, it shuts down the repeater. Not a good thing. You don't want that. And of course, the term we used, we don't want the gator to get you. So if you hear somebody get cut off by the repeater because they continue talking, what'll happen on a lot of repeaters when they release their mic, we call it a raspberry. The repeater will make some god awful sound, and then we know that we talked too long and the gator got us. So you don't want that gator to get you. Keep it short. Keep your messages short. Good advice, but try it. Why not? See what happens if you talk for a little while. See what the repeater does. It'll do something like it'll have a timeout timer on there, and you won't be able to continue talking. You're going to talk, but nobody's going to hear you because the repeater just shut down. Another thing about repeaters that I want to talk about, and this goes along with this idea of timing, is when repeaters are linked. Now, we link repeaters to be able to build a network of repeaters to be able to cover a larger area, a larger region. So we might have repeaters linked all over a state, all over multiple states to have a larger coverage area. So when I key up one repeater, the other repeaters in the network will key up. So they all come up. Well, as you might imagine, that takes time for everything to key up. It might not come up instantly. It might take a few seconds. So again, this can exacerbate those delays when you start talking. So if you're on a linked repeater, really want to pause. You really want to take a couple of breaths before you start talking. Make sure that the repeater is up. And most of all, I think if you're a regular user on a system, especially a linked system, know your system, know how the system works. And in some cases, like we have a system here in Southern California called Cactus. It's a private repeater system that we're members of. And I at the moment I'm not a member. I've dropped my membership because where I'm living, I can't get access to it. But we have a handbook that's about an inch thick that describes how the repeater network operates, because there's literally 100 repeaters on the network and they're all over the country. Some are linked by microwave, some are linked by the internet, but they're linked. And so you can control which repeaters you actually bring up. I might want to just bring up several repeaters rather than the whole network, or maybe I want to bring up the whole network. But it takes time. You have to be aware of that. But again, know the system operators, the system owners, know how the system works, and become knowledgeable of how that system operates. In a linked repeater, that's cool. Now, I mentioned earlier I'm not going to go into any detail, but again, the same notion here is Echolink and IRLP. These are two things that you'll run into a lot. And there's others as well, but Echolink and IRLP are both very common. Echolink is computer to repeater communications through the internet. IRLP is computer to computer communications. So, in other words, that's going to be used to basically interconnect multiple repeaters over the internet. Yeah, I see there's a raised hand. Wait, I'm almost done here. We'll answer some questions in a minute, but I see your hand up. Leave your hand up. Um, Echolink and IRLP, we're not going to go into any detail on that here tonight. Again, this is a topic that we could spend an entire evening on, and I hope that we do that soon. So Dan, we'll talk about that on Tuesday. I think it's a good topic for us to go, but it is beyond the scope of this presentation tonight. So watch for a future presentation on that. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, and this is really the kind of the final bit of this, is I'm on a net and all of a sudden I'm elected to be net control. What do I do now? What do I do? First off, in the immortal words of Douglas Adams, don't panic. Some of you will get that, some of you won't. That's okay. He's one of my faves, one of my favorite authors, but don't panic. You're now in charge. No reason to panic. But you might be just a relief operator. If you're just a relief operator taking over for the net control operator, you need to have the net roster. You need to know who's checked in, and you need to know the status of every individual. Is there outstanding traffic? All the things that you need to know that the net control knows. Now, if you're in a same physical location, the net control operator can just hand you everything, hopefully, and you're ready to go. But if you're in a remote location, another location on the radio, you might have to transfer some information from the current net control to you taking over. But make sure you have all that information. You need to know who's on the net, if there's any outstanding traffic, replies, anything that's open items on the net. Know what those are. So in other words, is NCS expecting replies back from previous messages that haven't been answered yet? So that should be noted in the log, and the net control operator should be keeping track of that. So he's going to pass that information to you. Any other items? There could be any other thing going on, but somebody's off frequency on another frequency passing traffic. That should be noted in the log so that you know that what's going on. So my favorite is bio. Yeah, we all need to take bio breaks every now and then. So we don't have to spell it out on the air, but net control, I'm going to be gone for about 10 minutes and I'll be back. We all have to do that if we're on an extended deployment. Important. I talked about protocols and procedures and all that. You're going to adhere to all that stuff if you're going to become net control operator. So you're going to identify the net when you take over. This is the Indian Wells Valley Emergency Net. And I'm going to state the purpose of the net if this is a disaster or a drill exercise. If it's just a little local net that I'm just taking over for the net control operator, I won't state the purpose again. But if it's a real situation, a real operation like a drill or an exercise, I may state the purpose. I'm also going to say this is a drill. Important thing to do. If you're in a drill, this is a drill. This is not a real event, because people stumble onto your frequency and hear you talking about some disaster, and they're going to get all anxious and excited, wonder what's going on. Well, it's just an exercise. So always state that it's a drill. State the purpose. You might ask for emergency traffic. Then you might do a roll call just to make sure everybody's there to go through the list and ask for check-ins. If you missed anybody or if there's any new check-ins, get those at that time. So you're taking over as net control operator. So those are just some basics, real basic stuff, but kind of gives you the idea. And it's a good thing to practice this. We like to do this in our nets here. We'll practice that occasionally, is to have someone else take over as a net control operator. Typically what we'll do is, again, this is a weekly test. It's an emergency, what we call our emergency net. We're just testing our radios and making sure things are working. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll ask a second operator to close the net. So he'll do a roll call and check everybody out of the net. So that's something that's a good exercise to go through. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is interference. And interference can take a lot of forms, but I really want to focus on what we will call jammers, because this is some of you're bound to run into sooner or later on any frequency, whether you're on a repeater, on VHF, UHF, or on HF, we get jammers. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with a jammer? Now, there's two types of jammers. There's a jammer that's unintentional. Somebody's got an open mic. They're in their car and they're sitting on the mic switch. Oh, that happens. How do you deal with that? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. We can deal with that. But if intentional interference and intentional jammer is the thing I want to talk about. The most important thing you can do if someone is jamming your net and interfering with it is do not respond to them. Ignore them. I know it's human nature. You want to yell at the guy. You want to tell him where to go. You want to, give him a piece of your mind. Don't do it. That's what he wants. He wants to get noticed. He wants to know that you know he's there and he's causing problems for you. So just ignore it. Just ignore the interference. Continue as if nothing is going on. That is the best practice. Now, you might not be able to continue immediately. In other words, you might be interfering with a transmission that you're receiving, a communications. And so you might, I'll give you some ideas of how to play with that, but just ignore it, completely ignore it. And it's tough. It's tough, especially if you're a type A personality. It's really tough because you want to call the guy out. Don't do that. It's not good. Like I said, this is what the jammer's after. This is what they want. They want you to recognize them and be noticed. If you ignore them, they'll just go away. He wants that self-satisfaction that he's causing problems with your net. Yeah, that's it. Acting like nothing is happening discourages them. And so how do you do that? Never refer to them as a jammer. Don't call them, oh, we're being jammed. I can't understand you. You're going to have to transmit again. We're being jammed. Don't say that. Say, well, hey, could you repeat that last transmission? I got some local interference here and I didn't quite catch everything you said. Could you try that again, please? You're not recognizing the jammer. You're saying, oh, I got some local interference here. Don't recognize it as somebody jamming. I think that's a good practice. Could you repeat that last statement? Don't say that you're being jammed. Just say, yeah, I'm getting some local interference. Could you repeat that? I didn't catch all of that last transmission. The other thing that may happen is you might have to move to another frequency, which is not uncommon. Having all that stuff figured out ahead of time is important. In other words, what frequency are you going to move to? Having all that decided ahead of time and given a tactical name, a tactical description of the frequency. Don't ever announce a frequency on the air. What's going to happen if I'm going to move over to 5.2? Well, jammer's going to follow you. Now I'm going to move over to frequency 3, and the jammer's going to go, gee, I wonder what frequency 3 is. Well, it's over on 440. He doesn't have a 440 radio, hopefully. But anyway, so that's the idea of using a tactical name for frequencies ahead of time. Okay, that's how you deal with jamming. Ignore it. I cannot stress that enough. Please just ignore it and just continue on like nothing was wrong, and they will go away. So in general, I think it's important when you're in a net, always have writing materials on hand, a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil. Make sure you've got that close at hand so you can take notes. Have important information on hand, like frequencies, the names of the nets, like I just described. Nets have tactical names. Make sure you have all that information about the frequencies and all that for your group. Remember that you may be called upon to be net control at any time. That's why I like to encourage people to keep a list of the net, write them down as people check in, write down the check-ins yourself, get their call sign and their name and a tactical call if they're using it, find out where they are. Listen, that's part of listening, getting that information. The other good thing about listening and doing this is you get to recognize the people that you're working with regularly. If you're in a group, you'll recognize their voice, you'll recognize their call sign with one letter. If they get obscured by another transmission, like interference, you hear one letter. Oh, I know that call sign, so I know who that was. That's a key point. Listen and listen to the people, listen to their voice, recognize who they are. But keep track of that yourself. Even though you're not the net control operator, do it anyway. It's just good practice because you may have to be the net control operator. And maintain the list, just as the net control operator would maintain. Okay, so somebody's got traffic here. I'm going to make a note of that. And oh, they're leaving the net. I'm going to make a note of that, and et cetera, et cetera. So I have all that information on hand. It means that if you have to take over, you can take over with little delay. If you've already got all the information, you don't have to have the net control op give it to you again. Okay. And it's just good practice. Like I say, it is a good practice. It's good to practice that. It's be comfortable writing this stuff down, writing down call signs, making a list. But I leave you with one closing thought. Don't ever, ever forget my 3 rules. I think that's probably the most important thing you can take away from this talk tonight is that it's most important to listen. Always listen. Listen to what others are saying. Listen to what's going on the radio before you transmit. All right, that is it. And we're open to questions. I'm going to kill this off. And I see I've got a question, at least one question up there.
You got a couple of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Got three hands up. We'll have Barry go through the list of the moment here. Dave, go ahead and take it. Okay.
What? Sorry, I was having to unmute really quick. Back to the PL CTCSS
Right.
standards. Was curious if you're monitoring the base frequency, 143, 200, whatever it is, and they're running different CTCSS codes on that frequency. Can you hear the traffic because you're not using the CTCSS code on your end to trigger your squelch?
That's correct.
Can you hear all of the traffic on
Yeah.
that frequency, people talking over each other, all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
because you're monitoring the base frequency?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're on, if you, and same thing with repeaters. If they're using PL tones to kind of separate traffic, and you don't have the tone squelch enabled on your radio, in other words, on the receive side, you're going to hear their traffic. So it's as if there wasn't any PL tone at all. So yeah, that's absolutely correct. So the way to what you need to do is if you want to limit the traffic to a specific group, know what PL tone they're using and set your radio to use that PL tone on receive. So that's the receive squelch. That's how you do that. Oh, and it varies from radio to radio. To have your specific radio, you might have to do it a specific way. But if the radio has a tone squelch on receive, that's what you'd set to whatever frequency you want to listen to. Okay, good question.
All right.
All right.
Prez, W2PW, come on.
Hello there.
Hi there.
Hi, good evening, Dennis and everybody in the group. I'm delighted to talk to you all, and this is a really cool get-together. Briefly, I'd like to mention that I have over 50 years of repeater experience and over 25 years of IRLP All-Star experience. I would be delighted to give a talk if you're interested. Please, I like nothing more than to stand here and pontificate.
Kindred spirit.
Yes, right.
There you go.
I'm an introvert that loves nothing better than to be on stage. I can't figure this out.
What's your call sign so we can get in touch with you?
W2PW.
Okay.
And it's TP Waterman, Tango Papa Waterman at gmail.com. TP Waterman at gmail.com. We used to use the ARRL, but unfortunately that forwarding service is having some issues.
Yeah. Sketchy at best.
Yeah. Okay, so
All right, great.
I want to expand on a point that you made earlier, Dennis, about timing. So one of the best practices I've heard is if you're transmitting, you literally squeeze your mic.
Yeah.
You're ready up to your mouth. In that time that you've squeezed your mic and then raised it to your mouth, you will have already opened up the repeaters.
That's a good point.
I see you nodding, so I know what we're talking about. Briefly, I want to go through a little description of what happens when you transmit. When you squeeze your mic, your radio comes on the air. it starts producing RF. It starts humming at 114.8 hertz per second, for example.
Whatever
It
tone
opens
you
up,
set. Yeah.
yep, it opens up the audio channel. Your signal shoots at the speed of light up to the repeater. That's great, okay? The repeater squelch opens. It then begins to evaluate the incoming tone to make sure that it is 114.8, and that takes a number of cycles to count, okay? Then the squelch opens. Then the all-star node is notified that there's an incoming signal. Then it starts generating packets down the line. At the other end, those packets come in and they tell the other end's transmitter to go on the air, which goes on the air. The CTCSS starts transmitting. The RF goes out. The receiver opens up in the person's house. And here's what you have to say. It's amazing it works at all.
But it takes time.
It takes a few seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why we always say pause between transmissions
Right.
and also key your mic and pause before you start speaking.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And
That
even if
gives-
you're not, even if you're not on all-star, you know, IRLP, any of the linked
Right.
repeaters, if you're just on one repeater, our repeater here, the
Right.
repeater controller does take like half a second for the whole thing to come up. So you really do have to pause, even if you're
and
not.
all those half seconds add
all
up.
things add up. That's right.
Yep,
That's exactly
they do.
right. Mhm.
So with that in mind, with the amount of time that it takes for the channel to turn around, even if it's like you said, just 2 radios on Simplex, let alone a repeater, let alone a linked repeater system, let alone an IP link system. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you then say that you have a bit of a conflict with the hesitation method where you go, this is, and you let go?
You know, on a linked repeater system, on a big linked repeater system, or on an internet linked repeater, that could be, I suppose that could be a problem. I use that as common practice for our HF nets and our
Boom.
local
HF
2-meter net. 2-meter
It
net.
works very well on
Very
single
well on-
sideband.
Yep.
Because doubling is not a problem.
That's not a problem. Yeah. But
It's a problem.
on our local 2-meter net, it works very well for us on our local repeater. So if you're on a local repeater, you know, not on a linked machine, I think it's good practice to do that, to cut down on the doubles. It really does.
Will you welcome a counterpoint?
Sure, absolutely. I'm
What
open.
we do in our Long Island nets, and we have 3, 4, 5 repeaters that link up together at the touch of a button with All-Star, and they unlink with another touch of a button.
Okay.
Is that we separate. Net control actually controls. Okay. Net control says all stations west of 112, please check in now. All stations between 112 and William Floyd, check in now. All stations to the east of William Floyd, check in now. All stations on All-Star, all stations on Echolink, all stations that we missed. By separating it out.
Sure.
And I loved your thing before about the suffix and the call sign. If I had faith that people knew what a suffix was.
Okay, I see a comment here about that. Yeah.
The letter after the number in your pi r squared carry the 4. Wait a second. Okay, so here's my counterpoint. I would like everybody, with your permission, Dennis, I'd like everybody to unmute all at once. Unmute.
Why? No,
we're gonna get to a demonstration.
No.
Okay.
We
So
got
I'm gonna go 3, 2, 1, and point. And when I go 3, 2, 1, point, I want everybody to say at the same time, this is. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, point.
This is.
Oh, well, that's a cluster. See, here's the thing. I propose that the hesitation method is not only useless, it's actually causes doubling. Net control is literally telling everybody at once, all of you pick up your mic and transmit simultaneously, and hope that one of you is lasting for more than the 78 milliseconds it takes to say this is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Okay, so my work is done here. I appreciate your letting me come in, and I would love to talk to you guys further. So thank you.
That sounds good. We'll talk it over on Tuesday, and if it's a yay, we'll contact you. But it sounds like I'd love to see a presentation on that. And yeah, I take your point about what I was describing as the this is pause. It works well for us because we've got a small group, And so if you've got 100 people trying to check in, you've got to break that up into groups anyway. Like you say, by region, by shoe size, whatever it may be. That works really well. We had 100 people in our group, 100 members in our group in Orange County.
Wow.
And we typically get half of those checking in. So yeah, we had to do something to keep everybody from colliding, break them down into small groups
Yeah, the hesitation method works well until it doesn't.
until
And
it does. Yeah, you're right.
you'll never know that that critical mass has been reached. So I propose, rather than having two methods, one for a smaller net and one for a bigger net, just use the one method.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Okay,
Fair enough. I like that.
thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Paul, you got your hand up there, sir.
Yeah, I had three questions. I don't know if he wants them all at once. One was he talked about don't dump traffic, and he said that about 4 times, but he really didn't define what dump traffic is.
Okay. Okay. Well, the idea is that what you're going to do is if you have a message and you're going to give it, you need to give that to somebody else on the net. Don't just call net control and say your message. You want net control to give you permission to transmit that message. So that's what I mean by dumping your traffic. It's just kind of a colloquialism that we use that if, I just call the net control and I say, I've got traffic for thus and so, and here's my message. You've just blown it by doing that because you just wasted all that time. You want to contact the net control station. You want to tell them, maybe when you contact them, I have traffic. Don't say anything else. So I have traffic. Net control recognizes you when they recognize you. And you say, I have traffic, state the nature of your traffic, who it's for. That might be what net control asks you. And you may say, well, I have traffic for thus and so. And okay, so don't dump the message yet. You're hanging on to that message. Net control will contact the station you're trying to get a hold of, possibly, and ask if they're there. Are they ready to copy the message? And only at that time do you transfer once that other station is there and acknowledged, and you've been acknowledged, now you can pass the message to that third party. Yeah, go ahead.
Dennis, you do like to talk, and I understood the proper procedure, and you kind of didn't listen. I just wanted to know what was the definition of the procedure we shouldn't do. I already knew the good procedure.
Well, that's it. Yeah, dumping traffic. That's like
you kind of didn't listen, and I'd only give you a hard time just because we're communicators and educators. So
that's true.
That's with a smile.
Okay.
The second or third one was, if we have somebody who's yakking on the frequency that we're on, and they're doing it in such a way to interfere with us, should we have in our back pocket some CT CSS tones, and like everybody would switch to 218 tone or 156 tone? We just have a list in the back of our pockets. Here's the 2 or 3 tones we'll switch to in this order if somebody interferes. And let me ask one more question, and then you go at it. Some of the repeater book I look at, it'll list on certain things that there's no tone, and others will list an abbreviation, something like, I think it's like CSQ, which I think basically means, does that mean no tone, I think?
No. Okay. All right. Yeah, I didn't touch that topic. Okay, for the tones, if you're on a repeater, it's kind of tough to change tone on a repeater unless the repeater is pre-programmed to do that.
I meant Simplex.
Simplex, yeah, Simplex. That's not a bad idea. You're still going to have the interference because you're still on the same frequency, but you won't be listening to the guy jabbering. But you would have to have that all prearranged to do that, like you stated. It would have to be something that you'd all agree on ahead of time, that you're going to switch to a different tone. It might be just easier to switch to a different frequency. I think all in all, that's what we do on our nets. If we're getting interference from someone on our nets, we'll just move to another frequency. That's the easiest thing to do. Just turn the dial, and that works best for me, frankly. Switching tones might be a little bit more complex, and folks might have a little bit more difficulty doing that. That's going to take practice. So CSQ is probably, I don't use it. I just use the tone squelch like PL or the CTCSS. CSQ, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the coded squelch, like the one that Yaesu has. Yaesu, they have a digital tone squelch that they have. It's just a code that they send.
Oh, it might be that choice I see where it says tone, you put in a number, and then there's another choice that looks like tone squelch, and it's
Oh, yeah, where's my, I was gonna say, yeah, there's a,
multiple choices in the programming.
of the radio, yes. So you have a
Yeah.
tone on transmit, which will
Yeah, it
just
might
be T. And
Might be
then,
that one I don't recognize.
yeah, and if you have a tone set on receive, it's going to have a different, it'll say something like TSQ, but it'll have a different indicator on a hand, let's say like on a handy talkie. But there's also a code, it's a code, like a digital code, and I can't think of what that's called because I don't use it, but I know some of the manufacturers have that, and some of them are proprietary. So that's something you would have to deal with, is that particular,
DCH,
sorry,
DCS.
DCS.
Okay,
That's digital squelch. So does that answer the question? I hope.
Someone mentioned that CSQ means no tone, and that's what I think I looked up. Although there is another part in the things when I'm programming a radio, it'll say tone, or your choice could be DCS or tone squelch, and I don't understand all of them. I've used two of them, but that's good.
You just need to know that one setting is for tone on transmit, and the other setting is for receiving the tone, to open the squelch on receive if you receive that tone. And they can be two completely different tones, as a matter of fact. They don't have to be the same. So hopefully that answers the question.
Good for now.
Okay.
okay. Gene, you had your hand for a while. Go ahead and take it.
Yeah, this is relating to the linked repeater system. I'll buy a repeater, set it up, configure it appropriately, put it on a high point, or at least the antenna for it on high point, and get the FCC's blessings and all that. And it works. People use it. But now I want to join that new repeater system of repeaters. How do I go about doing it?
Gene, you're breaking up really bad.
Sure.
I don't know if that, Dan, is Gene breaking up at your end? He's breaking up here. I'm having a real hard time understanding.
He is.
Yeah, and my repeater.
You're not doing it, Gene. You're just breaking up pretty bad. Let's move to somebody else and come back to you, Gene. Neil,
Okay.
go ahead.
Might back off the away from the.
Well, the question I've got for you guys is I get intimidated by the administrative side of logging and all of that. And I was just wondering if you have any software that you recommend, databases or anything like that to help you keep track of the logs and the nets.
Actually, there's an application you can do online called NetLogger. And that's a good one that you can use. We use that on some of our nets here. In fact, we've been wanting to do a presentation on that. I've got a guy who I'd like to get to talk about NetLogger, but that's a piece of, it's basically a web-based logger. One of the things that I do now, thanks to my SEC who suggested it, and I tried it and it's not bad, is I use, I'm on WinLink, so I use the ICS2, not the ICS2, it's the, the netlog form. It's the netlog form on WinLink. One of the forms that's embedded in WinLink is a netlog, and you can run it. It's just a web-based log, and you just ask, you're not running WinLink. Yes, I know I'm not running WinLink, and I just save the file, and I can open it up anytime and have the data. So it's basically just the data, and I can export that to an Excel spreadsheet, like if I want to do basically merge data or search for things or something like that, and that works very well. Thanks, Dan, for that suggestion.
Yeah,
Can
can I add a tidbit there? The climate is ripe to use that, start making suggestions to improve it. It's pretty basic, and I find it to be phenomenally useful because it makes it easy on me moving stuff where I need it. But there have been some good suggestions for improving it. So if you know how to type, my handwriting is so bad, I should have learned how to type, but I never have. I can fumble through it if I don't have to talk. And I have a question about something basic I might have missed when you said it, but when you're using an HT or the mic, talk across it. I learned that back in 1970 using a cab company's mobile radio system. And it's proven to be something that doesn't come up too often when you're learning, for new amateur radio operators. So I was kind of surprised you didn't mention that.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it, but yeah, talking across the microphone is not a bad idea. That works with a lot of microphones. It doesn't work with this microphone. I don't talk across this microphone. I just talk near it. And likewise, this microphone, I talk near it when it's on the desk. I don't talk across.
This is specifically applicable to hand mics,
a handheld
and,
mic.
and HTs.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
okay,
Dan, stand by, Dan. Dan.
Big Dan, not me.
Yeah, you stand by.
Oh, okay.
Dan Sloan, stand by.
yeah, you
John,
can't jump in there, Dan.
Did we answer your question, John?
This is Dan Sohn.
Stand by. John, you were asking the question about the software of the databases. Were we able to answer your question? Was that sufficient information?
Okay.
You're muted. Oh, you're gone. You disappeared.
Okay, let's move on here to somebody else real quick. Keep this rolling.
Yeah.
Tom, go ahead and take it.
Thank you, sir. I've done net control for some large operations, for example, the Marine Corps Marathon. And one of the things, especially new people have to come get over is operator anxiety, because we get, it's not a particularly urgent message. Water station 4 needs more water is not the end of the world, but yet they get anxious the longer they have to wait to give it. And then suddenly they're declaring emergencies and stuff like that because you haven't given them time to talk. So it's important to introduce new people to the concept that sometimes they're just going to have to wait. And
that's true.
As the monitoring issue, if you ever use a commercial mic, and some of them work quite well with some of the name brand radios, you'll see that you can't push the PTT without pushing monitor first. They're physically interlocked to prevent it. And why that's true is because if they start talking over other people, everybody sharing that particular technology with them will get really angry and things will go bad. And on your own radio, you should know where the monitor button is, and you should make it a habit to use it as if your mic were interlocked, especially on emergency nets. You don't want to jump on top of somebody you didn't happen to know was talking if they're, passing urgent information about how many minutes they've got to wait for the helicopter before the patient will be deceased. So, you don't want to jump in on top of that. So learn where your monitor switch is and use it. I was trained that CSQ means carrier squelch. It's the same as saying no tone, but it was the abbreviation in our training, fire service and so forth, that it means carrier squelch.
That makes sense, actually. I've not run into that term personally, believe it or not, in all the years that I've been doing this, but yeah, that makes sense. Carrier squelch, which means no tone. Yeah, just a carrier.
Right. It's just a different way of saying it. And it's especially common abbreviation in repeater guidebooks, because you're looking there for what's the tone. So they tell you one by putting CSQ in the listing. Just thought I'd pass that on.
The carrier opens it up. Yeah, that makes sense.
The other code is DCS, and that's for digital carrier squelch.
Yeah.
And that is the third way to do that. And the last thing is you could at least try FLNet for keeping track of the net. It's part of the whole NVEMS set of programs. And I didn't give it enough time to get truly used to it, but you can try it and see if it works for you. Back to net, W3TDH.
All righty.
Gene, you're
Thanks,
back
Tom.
on here. Gene, you're back on here. You got your audio taken care of?
I hope so. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, this is the situation.
Oh,
Say I go and buy a repeater.
hey, Gene, why don't you turn off your video and see if that helps?
Stop showing me.
Yeah, just cut your video. In other words, mute your camera. Stop the video.
Okay.
That should save some
got
time.
it. All right, I go out and buy a repeater. Get it all set up, get an antenna for it, get it up to a high spot, get a blessing from the FCC. It works. Now I want to join a link system of repeaters. How do I do that? Is there one like master repeater controller that grants me access into link system, or how does it go?
Okay, so that's a loaded question, because if it's an analog repeater, the answer to that is no. If it's digital, if we're talking things like we were talking about earlier, digital systems, there is actually like a master index of all the nodes and what have you. But on an analog, if you're just putting up an analog repeater, you have to coordinate it. There's usually a repeater coordinating, a frequency coordination committee that you have to go through. And that may take some time, but once that's done, it's coordinated. Now you have to talk to the owners of the machine you want to link to. Okay, so like for instance, I mentioned Cactus Intertie that I have belonged to in the past. The Cactus Intertie is a nationwide network of linked repeaters, and a lot of those repeaters are what we call affiliate repeaters. And those are repeater owners that have asked to link into Cactus Intertie.
Dennis,
yes,
this
sir.
could be a whole different subject.
I know it could be. We've talked about this. I think we're going to have a presentation on this, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, we're going over an hour and a half.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time. We've been at this for an hour and a half. Yeah, gee, this may be a little bit too much. It's a pretty broad topic on linking repeaters and how you go about doing it. The best advice is, if there's a repeater you want to link to, seek out the owner of that repeater and talk to them directly. That's the way to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anthony, you got your hand up, sir. Go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, if you are getting, you're starting out keeping track of logging for a net, the best way to do it is do practice when you're not the net controller.
Yeah, that's what
Pretend you're the net controller. This is the same thing I always tell people if they're getting started with contest logging software. Just try it while you're listening as opposed to operating, and that way you'll get everything down. And then when you're ready to start using it, it'll seem a lot easier. But if you try and do it when you're trying to run the net and do the logging at the same time when you're learning, you'll run into a problem.
Absolutely. That's what I encourage. That's what I was referring to, is I encourage people to do that when they're participating in a net. Keep track of what's going on yourself. Keep a log, whether you're net control or not. If you're just participating, keep a log of all the stations that are on the net. Absolutely correct. That's great advice.
Thank you, Anthony. Rich, you got your hand up there, sir.
Yes, hi. Thanks for a very interesting presentation. Did I hear you imply earlier that there is a way to deal with someone who has accidentally sat on the microphone, pushed to talk, and did not realize it?
Yeah, I mentioned that, didn't I? I forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's a tough one. And the reason I even made this statement about that was it happened to me the other day. Our Monday night net this week, I had an open mic, and one of the guys, actually two people on the net, sent me a text message telling me that I had an open mic. So that's one way to do it. If you know who's got the open mic, if you don't know who's got the open mic, it becomes a real problem. And of course, the repeater will time out, and now you're in a fix. And what you might do is just go to Simplex on the output of the repeater and move people to another frequency. Just put out a message, move them to another repeater if the repeater is stuck. In other words, if somebody's got a stuck mic. This has happened many times. That's actually about the first time I can ever remember that ever happened to me. But we had I don't ever remember having an open mic before like that. I think one of our cats stepped on the mics on the lock switch on the mic, desk mic, but because they were in the room. But yeah, that can be a problem. That can be a problem, and there's all kinds of different ways to track it down. If it is you might even have to do some direction finding to figure out who's got the transmitter that's stuck. If it's on continuously and they're not recognizing that and turning the thing off. So getting into radio direction finding is a good skill to have in that case. And we've used that before to find a stuck mic, is using radio direction finding. So hopefully that helps.
Thank
That's
you.
especially true. Go ahead, Richard.
No, I just said thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, and it also depends if you're an emergency or just a routine net, to the importance of it. Okay, I got no more hands up. You see anything in chat?
Just a quick reminder for everyone, Dan. There's links to the other first steps in MCOM available on the RATPAC site. I also put a link for the basics getting started with VHF, UHF radios to talk about setting up repeaters and operating Simplex. There's a link in the chat. And then next week we'll be doing another one in this series on getting started with MCOM. We're going to be talking about getting ready to operate the ARRL VHF UHF contest at the beginning of June, and how contesting can be a very valuable way, even without the competition, of getting time on the air to practice with VHF and UHF.
Okay, thank you. How you doing there? Dennis, I'm sorry.
Well, I was looking through the comments. There's some good comments here. I just read across the one that talks about, yep, even today, you're talking about 60s and 70s TV shows with the character constantly holding the PTT, or not at all, just holding the microphone and never hitting the PTT. There's that goes on in TVs and TV shows and movies all the time. I always squawk about that when I see that.
Dennis?
Yeah.
HT220. HT220, baby.
Yeah.
But it's got a Baofeng BF888 inside of it. It works modern, man. 16 channels.
That's great. That's funny.
Okay. Do we have any
All
more
right.
questions out there?
See,
Do we have any more questions out there?
Barry, were there any questions? Is Barry still here?
No, he left,
Oh, he left. Okay.
unfortunately. I didn't realize that until a few moments ago.
Yeah, there's some comments. There's a comment here from Tom about when we're talking about formal traffic. Yeah, I said I didn't want to go into all the details of handling formal traffic. We've got other presentations on that. So yeah, be aware of that there's a lot involved in that, and more than we could ever do tonight. It would be a whole presentation on just that.
We've entered into an arena where we have a lot of things that could go on forever. We need to break them up.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, if there are other questions that we didn't get answered tonight, so I saw somebody made a comment on here that they'll comment on the RATPAC groups IO. I would urge you to do that if there's a question. Go ahead and put a comment on RATPAC, the RATPAC groups.io group, and we can cover it there. How's that?
Okay. Well, and when we send it out, when Anthony sends us out later, he also includes a link to the messages here, so we can pick it up that way also.
That's right. Yeah, I'll go over that. I will go over those. And Dan, I will send you a PDF.
Super. Appreciate that.
We'll be ready to go.
All right. Does anybody else got anything before we pull a plug?
Ben, get to bed.
Press, I look forward to talking to you soon.
I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
My question about phonetics and the call sign.
Yeah.
Um,
That's your
I've
comment
heard-
about kilowatt?
No, I've heard
Oh,
a few people put in figure or numeral or number before they put in, say, my 3 in my call sign. I didn't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I haven't done it yet, but I just heard people doing it.
Well, I've never done that with my call sign. Not with a call sign.
So I was just looking for your opinion on whether that's worth doing or not.
On a call sign, I don't know that that's necessary. In a message, yes, figures. If you're giving a series of numbers, it's good to say figures and then give the numbers. But yeah, I don't know. A call sign, I've never heard anybody do that before.
No, that kind of lengthens it out more, and it's usually unnecessary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Two-
I
two
think that would
syllables.
confuse. That'd be
It
very
adds 2
confusing.
syllables.
Yeah.
Well, before we go much farther, because I need to close this out, Finn, you're here. Let's see if you got anything different to do at Holland.
Oh, yeah.
Finn just raises his thumbs up. He isn't saying anything.
Yeah. Were you talking to me, Dan?
No, talking to Finn there in Holland,
In Norway.
Norway. I'm sorry. Got you there someplace there.
Thanks for
Please,
joining us. Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, Finn. It's great to have you here again. That's cool.
It's nice being here. A lot to learn about. I like the presentation. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
It is,
well, we
it
will
is
have-
absolutely international, the content.
You bet.
Yep.
It works anywhere. That's true. Absolutely true.
Okay,
Right.
well, with that, unless somebody, wait a minute, no, nobody's got a hand up. So unless somebody's got something else to say, we're gonna pull the plug on this.